Now into Unit 4, our final unit for the semester. This unit is going to focus on ecology and evolution, not in that order, but we are going to jump ahead to Chapter 22, which is entitled Descent with Modification, a Darwinian View of Life. Here's a picture of young Charles Darwin, and these are many of the images that we will get to see in the course of this chapter. So in 1859, Charles Darwin published a book with the very long-winded title of On the Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection or the Preservation of Favored Races in the Struggle for Life, which most people just refer to as Origin of Species, or shorter still, we can just call it The Origin. And this book focused the attention of biologists, paleontologists, geologists, all on the great diversity of organisms that we see in the modern day, as well as organisms of the ancient past. One note, when Darwin mentioned the preservation of favored races, he was talking about different varieties within species, not necessarily humans, but of all living organisms. So Darwin suggested that current species are the descendant of ancient species, many of which may have gone extinct, and evolution, as proposed by Darwin, the Darwinian evolution, can also be termed descent with modification. And evolution is really considered to be both a pattern and a process, meaning evolution is occurring in the present day. It has happened into the ancient past, and we can see the hallmarks of evolution in the patterns of biological diversity that are present at a single moment in time. For example, here we've got a beetle that is living in the Namib Desert in southwestern Africa. And this beetle appears to be doing some form of early morning yoga. But what it's really doing is it is taking advantage of the early morning dew to collect water. The Namib Desert is one of the driest places on Earth, so how can anything live there? In order to live there, one of the limiting resources is going to be water. So this beetle gets its daily water by performing a little sun salutation, which enables dew to condense on its limbs, and that's how it gets its daily water. Is the water runs down its legs towards its mouth, and it can consume that water. So while Darwin is considered to be a controversial person by lay people, he was, as Newton suggested, standing on the shoulders of giants, meaning that his ideas were not completely new and out of left field, but there were a lot of ideas before him that led him to propose the idea of evolution by means of natural selection. So the first chapter of Origin of Species is really a review of what other scientists had put forth about the context of the mutability of species, including Alfred Russel Wallace. So here's a timeline going from the before Darwin was born in 1809 up until 1870, looking at several of the contributors to Darwin's way of thinking, at least around his same time period, his contemporaries. Hutton, Malthus, Lamarck, Cuvier, Lyell, and Alfred Russel Wallace. But we can go back into the ancient past, at least from a historical standpoint, and think about how diversity has been viewed throughout history. So Aristotle was one of the first people to write something down. He was a famous philosopher. He considered that all species were fixed and that they could be all arranged within a natural scale, from the most lowly creatures, things like worms and insects and things like that, up onto a scale of being up through reptiles and amphibians and lower mammals and higher mammals, and eventually you get to people, humans, that would be in the middle of the scale, and then above humans you would have gods and demigods and things like that. So that it was all basically just a line of complexity, so that he arranged them as fixed and arranged on this line. In the Old Testament, there is writings that suggest that all species were perfectly designed individually within a narrow time frame, and since that point they have been immutable. So fast forward to the 18th century, the 1700s, and Carolus Linnaeus, who is the father of binomial nomenclature, founder of taxonomy, which is the science of classifying organisms. He was a creationist. He believed that all organisms were created perfectly and designed for a specific purpose, but he also thought that we could look at the individual species and classify them together, group them together based on similarity in appearance. We could codify all living organisms. And he came up with this system of what we call binomial nomenclature that we've talked about previously, where every species or specific type of organism has a generic name that's capitalized. For example, humans are in the genus Homo, and we have a specific epithet for the species of modern humans, which is Homo sapiens. So a two-name classification scheme, which at the time, coming out of the Middle Ages, there were a lot of organisms that had names that were very long and not uniform from one area to another, and Linnaeus kind of straightened that all out. Also, shortly before Darwin was born, the science of geology was being established. And through geology, the study of fossils was becoming more prominent. Now, why were people so interested in fossils around this time? Because it was the coal age, and coal is a fossil fuel, as it is called, and it is one of the reasons it's called a fossil fuel, one of the original fossil fuels, is because coal strata tend to have lots of actual fossilized remains in them. Most of our coal seams are actually the remains of ancient forests, so we find a lot of ancient plant fossils in our coal seams. And being able to identify the fossils that were in a coal seam enabled us to find more coal seams. And for that reason, there was an interest in studying these fossils. There's an economic interest there. But fossils are the remains of organisms from the past, usually found in sedimentary rock, not igneous or metamorphic rock. And these fossils are found in particular layers or strata in the rock. And one of the principles of geology is the idea that the lower strata of rocks were established first. It's called the principle of superposition, meaning that old rocks get put down on top of, new rocks are put down on top of old rocks. So the oldest rocks are the deepest down because they were laid down first, On top of them, newer and newer rocks. So it's basically the idea of if you make a pile, you have to build it from the bottom up. And as such, we know that older strata are found with older fossils in lower areas. Younger fossils are in more recent strata that are on top of the older strata. And another idea that came out of the science of geology is that the Earth was not actually a very young planet. It's actually a very ancient planet. So paleontology, the study of fossils, was developed by this person here. This is Georges Cuvier, who was one of the first paleontologists. Cuvier noticed that a lot of these fossilized organisms were not like modern living organisms. And he proposed that the reason for this is because of catastrophism, that there were catastrophic events that would create boundaries between different strata. However, some of the first scientific geologists, James Hutton and Charles Lyell, proposed that the Earth's surface is changing continuously and very slowly, and that the boundaries between the strata were not necessarily the cause of catastrophic events, but were actually the cause of the same types of events that might occur in the modern age, things like earthquakes and volcanoes and tsunamis and things like that. And this was called the principle of uniformitarianism, the idea that the mechanisms of change are relatively constant. And Darwin adopted this idea, and also this idea that the Earth was very ancient and not just a few thousand years old, but more likely a few million or possibly billion years old. Another scientist who influenced Darwin was Lamarck. Lamarck was French, as was Cuvier. Lamarck came up with an idea, a hypothesis of evolution, that species could change through time through use and disuse of certain body parts and the inheritance of acquired traits. It's an interesting idea, but it is an idea that is unsupported by evidence. So there's not data to support this hypothesis that of use and disuse. Lamarck was a brilliant scientist, and unfortunately the thing he's best known for is having an idea that is incorrect. But is he incorrect? In the modern day, with genetics, our ability to look at how DNA changes through time, we have found that it is maybe possible for acquired changes to our DNA to be passed on to our offspring. And this is something that is the burgeoning field of epigenetics. So Lamarck may have been correct to a certain degree, but not in the way that he proposed at all, or he could have even envisioned when he put this idea forward. However, Lamarck is still considered to be someone who did not put forth an idea that could be supported by evidence. For example, if a bonsai tree is planted and tended very carefully over a period of years to produce this shape, making it look like a smaller version of a large ancient tree. If this tree were able to produce seeds, you plant those seeds, they're not going to look like this bonsai tree. They're going to look just like a regular old pine tree. So all of this fellow's careful efforts at making a bonsai tree really are not going to get transferred to the progeny, of the offspring of this tree. So no transfer of acquired characteristics to the offspring.